So intellectually, we may say, yes, we're eternal beings, we're not the body. That's very different from realizing that knowledge. This is such a radical idea that we are something more than bodies and minds. That's a game changer right there. That is a world changer right there. To really understand what that means, that you are a spark of divinity, that you have an essence to yourself that is immortal.
This is the Jai Sugara method. We train to master our own mind. Hey guys, today I had an extraordinary conversation with Joshua Greene, an old friend of mine through the Jivamukti Yoga School in New York City. Joshua is a scholar of the Bhagavad Gita. He's also an expert on Holocaust studies, and he's retired from Hofstra University, but he's authored a number of books, and one of the ones I read that connected he and I many years ago is his book called Gita Wisdom, which is an introduction to the Bhagavad Gita. Now, today we talk about bringing an old Sanskrit text to life, and this reminded me of the times in college as an English literature major where I studied Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is dead. We don't speak like that anymore. But when you see a great actor bring it to life, you can be inspired by a line such as, "All the world is a stage," and you realize that everyone is playing their part here and there, and we wear different masks in different situations. So in this light, these nuggets of wisdom from an old Sanskrit text that some people perceive as religious, some people perceive as just a book on wisdom, but we always return to it to extract more and more of what Joshua and I refer to as the eternal Dharma or eternal teaching. So the nature of mind has not changed over the millennia. And when the mind keeps flowing outward, we get disappointed and we suffer. So Josh and I talk about the applied wisdom of the Gita in modern life. And in this light, he is an expert and always opens my mind and plants a few new seeds in there. And I hope this conversation today inspires you. I hope you take to your practice, and I hope you dig deeper into the philosophy of yoga and maybe even read a few verses from the Bhagavad Gita. Let's get right to the episode and the talk. Joshua.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, fantastic. Good to see you.
You too. You look like you're in some logging cabin in the Northwest Territories there.
It is the Northeast. It's happening. It's been a shift to return to nature. I've been wanting to for years, and the events of late caused me to speed up that action.
Sure. So where are you? Where is that beautiful cabin you're in?
It's in upstate New York. Do you know Rhinebeck area? I'm like 20 minutes from Rhinebeck in Dutchess County.
My mom had a house in Rhinebeck for many years.
Yeah.
It's where Omega is located.
Omega is a few miles down the road from me. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm doing okay. I've had my shots. I'm exercising. I'm watching my diet.
Okay.
And staying quite busy with my writing and teaching.
Wonderful.
So while I'm adjusting my camera here, tell me about your program. I remember you had I don't know if it was the same series that you had me on once long ago. Do you remember that? It was at Jivamukti.
Yeah. I think you came to the TV station, Josh.
Oh, did I?
Yeah. So that was through Z Living, Subhash Chandra station, the guy in India who has Z Living. And that went to 65 episodes. Wow. Aired in 20 countries. It was fantastic. And those were 45-minute episodes that aired for an hour on TV with commercials. So this is a new podcast, and this is the 6th episode. And you and I go way back. So you're the first person in the community who's on the show, and I'm excited to get it going.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored.
Yeah, no, we always have great conversations. I'd like to jump off into how you awoke to these teachings and the adventure of going to India and learning. And the idea that sometimes a spiritual awakening, I don't remember if yours was soft and gentle, but sometimes they're so radical in terms of reorienting one's priorities. Just give me the adventure of coming into this tradition and then deciding to go deeply into the study and practice of it.
Oh, what a wonderful question. Well, Jai, you know from your own experience, life positions us in circumstances. Some circumstances are darker than others, and any point is a good starting point for the spiritual journey. We've known people who came to yoga through drug addiction. We've known people who have come to yoga through meeting a beautiful teacher who inspired them to take to the path. My experience after 55 years of teaching this stuff, and how do you believe that, boy? When you start thinking in terms of half centuries, that's saying something. Is that most people embark on a practice not through some very profound philosophical grasp of the texts. You can quote verses till the cows come home, so to speak, but what really moves people is what mythologist Joseph Campbell used to call embarking on the road of adventure. Something happens to shake us out of our everyday world, either voluntarily or forced by circumstances. And we're obliged to make a change in our life. Either we change or we die. Now, death doesn't have to necessarily be a physical death of the body. It can be a psychic death as well. But every one of us at some point in our life confronts, again, in Campbell's terms, the belly of the whale, the point of no return, someplace where you just can't go on living the way you have until now. And if you're very lucky, you meet a teacher, or sometimes it's a community of people who show you there's another way to live. And that was the case for me. I've thought long and hard about this, as I'm sure you have as well. You can answer that question, how did you get into this gig? You can do that from a socio-historic point of view. I could say, well, I was a child of the 60s and we were all wearing crazy clothes and long hair and beads anyway. It wasn't that big a change. You could look at it, I think in my case, psychically. I was an only child of a divorced mother. I lost my dad to divorce when I was 2, and then my mom briefly remarried for about a year when I was 5. So you might say I lost a father twice, really. And when I met Krishna devotees in London, right around the time they were recording Indian devotional music with George Harrison at Apple Records, it wasn't because of some profound understanding of the teachings of Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. I walked into the ashram, which was a beautiful little building that George Harrison had rented for the devotees off Oxford Street, and I saw a ready-made family. I saw the brothers and the sisters I'd never had. I saw my teacher, Prabhupada, who was a father figure who wouldn't go away like the others had. I was lucky, I backed the right horse, so to speak. It was an authentic yogic tradition. And I've stuck with it ever since. And it's been the greatest blessing in my life.
Is that what brought you to India?
Sure. I wanted to see the culture in its roots, in its natural environment. So in 1971, I was at the ripe old age of 21, got on some kind of clunker of an airplane and managed to get to Delhi. And from Delhi to Vrindavan, Krishna's village, southwest of Delhi, in those days was a real trek. That was a hard thing to do. There was no national highway,
Yeah.
And so it took many hours, and you got there, and you got to imagine the scene in 1971. Vrindavan is a pastoral village. It's a cowherd village. There are medieval temples that were built by the Goswamis, followers of Chaitanya back in the 1500s. And, there are cows wandering the streets and peacocks. And in this little village, 32 square miles, 5,000 temples, 5,000 temples. Some of them are big, beautiful sandstone buildings. Others are tiny little, literally a hole in the wall. You'd be walking down a dirt road and you'll look at the wall next to you and there'll be a hole in it. And if you look inside, there's a pujari, hunched down performing arti to a little deity, literally in a hole in the wall. It's a magical place. And that showed me that there is another way to live.
So it sounds like it was a process for you. I too, I feel in my adult awakening, I had one awakening as a child, but as an adult, I was suggestible, open, and I was unhealed from the process of death. I had lost my brother, and I was consciously seeking as a young adult an answer to that question of where did he go and why does a good person die young? So it involved tons of reading. I even had a really hard party phase. I ran marathons. Things wouldn't quench my thirst. And when I went into the heart of it and surrendered completely and gave my life to the practice, it was radical. It was a complete about face in terms of what I valued in spending my money, who I would keep company with, and how I would extract meaning from things. Joshua, I remember getting back from one trip in India, and I looked in the mirror and saw the eyes. I connected to my eyes, not in a vain way, but in a way of looking for my soul. And I saw the additions I had made to myself in order to feel worthy in the world, including my big muscular body, the long hair, the financial success. And I started to ask in that moment, what would happen if I started to strip things back? And I started to let go, let go, let go. And it was super, I achieved such an incredible minimalism that has since been rebalanced. So there's a center. But this sounds like for you, less radical and more process oriented, or was there a radical period?
Sad to say, there was a radical period. Sad to say, not because I regret it, but it caused some people close to me, I think, some sadness. There's an initial experience when you discover the ancient teachings for many people of this almost volcanic awareness that, oh my gosh, I'm not my body. Oh my gosh, I'm an eternal soul. Oh, gee, I'm all of these traumas that I've known all my life, they don't define me. That's not who I am. And there's this exhilaration of, wow, I'm a spiritual being. And in that moment, unless you're careful, there can be a tendency to reject the life you've had, as though that's all Maya, that's all illusion now. And I was 19 years old when I moved into an ashram. And but let's say my discerning faculties weren't in their highest gear at that time. And I lost my mom about 5 months ago, Josh. She was my best friend. And I can't tell you how painful that was. And I asked her, she was 95. We grew up together. She had me when she was 25 years old, and we lived in a little apartment. So I asked her the months before she passed away, I said, did I hurt you? Did I make you sad or make you feel that I'd somehow not appreciated what you had done for me by moving into an ashram? She said, no, not at all. That was you. I saw you as being on an adventure, and she said, women in those days, back in the 60s, and 70s, they really didn't have the opportunities they have today to go on their own adventures, their own self-searching. So she said, in a way, I lived vicariously through what you were doing. And of course, you got really skinny and you shaved your head and all that stuff and put on robes. So I figured, yeah, he'll come around someday. you know. So it can have that effect, you know, of this kind of shock of the absoluteness of the teachings. Very, very powerful. So I would counsel your listeners or your viewers to go cautiously. This is very, very strong medicine, you know, teachings from the wisdom texts and the yogic traditions. Take it a step at a time. There's no need to rush into this. The smart way is the cool-headed way. Take it a step at a time.
I start here because it's so radicalized in terms of a point of view. You and I, at one point and to this day and every moment, are immersed in a culturescape, right? We are, for example, trying to make sense of things like mRNA, the economy, and it's hard to gather all this data. It's outwardly drawn and it's littered with information and misinformation. And so weeding through all of that, one can get lost. And the sense making that I talk about in, I have a daily practice program as the world is shifting. My yoga shala is that fire and that mat back there in the living room. And I broadcast on Zoom, right?
I've seen your work. I love all your films.
Thank you. Thank you. So I try to teach it as a process, but the sense making, I frame some of what I'm doing as I cannot guide you on putting together what's true or untrue on CNN or what's true on MSNBC. I myself am grappling with that. But instead, in order to make sense of the world, we can involute our energy for a little while and make sense of our inner reality and allow that to influence what we're looking at. For example, in light of the Bhagavad Gita, when we are looking at others, we are looking at an aspect of ourselves or the divine person. This sort of transformation at what we're looking at out here, when influenced by the spiritual practice, is a type of sense making. So I wanted to start with that adventure of one waking up, because it is sometimes tumultuous because it's radical in terms of defining what is real. Our capacity to say what is real starts to broaden and deepen, and it makes us, like for me, that confrontational moment of looking in the mirror after India, I felt a bit of guilt by being so attached to material possessions, and it radically caused me to give everything away, to a point where I was riding through India in 2013 on a motorcycle. Everything I owned could fit on the boxes I built on that bike. And that is extreme. It's radical. But these kind of desires can spring up in you to go in the other direction. And sometimes there's no way around the fact that spiritual work is not always tidy, unfortunately.
That was a pithy way of putting it. I remember one of my god brothers was on a walk with our teacher Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami. He passed away in 77, but so this was years ago. He asked him, Prabhupada, you know, before I became a yogi, a bhakti yogi, a devotee, my life was together. You know, everything was smooth. Everything that had a place and everything was in its place. And ever since I've embarked on this path, everything's topsy-turvy. It feels chaotic. You know, why is that? And Prabhupada's answer, I thought, was rather revealing. He said, well, it's like cleaning your room. When you first start cleaning your room, the furniture is all out of place. There's dust flying in the air everywhere. It looks worse than before you started. But by this cleaning process, when you're done, it'll be better than it ever was before. So yeah, initially it can feel like everything's being turned upside down, because it is. You know, all of the values, all the assumptions that we've had are now in question. Look, I'll tell you what, just for fun, let me give this a shot. Okay, do you mind? Let me see if I can give your viewers a 60-second primer on spiritual life. Can I do that?
Go for it.
Okay. Bottom line is this. Lesson number 1 of yoga and all the wisdom traditions. You are more than your physical and mental selves. There is a part of you, the core self, Atman in Sanskrit, which existed before this lifetime, which is existing now, and which will go on existing after the body has ceased to be able to function. That spark of consciousness, or Atman, is described as Sat Chit Ananda, eternal, fully self-aware, and blissful Ananda. We are joy-seeking creatures by nature. Because we've been in the cycle of birth and death for so long, we've forgotten that original nature. We can revive knowledge of ourselves as eternal beings through different contemplative practices, chanting, yoga, meditation, study. And the goal is to reawaken love of God. And through that love of God, love for all creatures. That's pretty much it. Those are the basic. Everything else is kind of embellishment around those core ideas. Mm-hmm. And there are many, as you know, many different kinds of yoga because many different kinds of people. So find the yoga that fits you, that you feel comfortable doing, and stick with that. It will work eventually.
And when we speak to a complete beginner of moksha and enlightenment, it just seems so far off sometimes that I explain things at the right time. I will go with the way you said it. But in terms of alleviating the pain and making it, extracting more meaning out of our experience here, to look under the surface to the layers. And what's great about yoga is I always think of it as an experiential practice. It's not necessarily a top down where we need the priest, shaman, or teacher all the time. If we get up and get in front of that fire at a nice time in the morning, we can have experiences that reveal the nature of reality in terms of meta positioning.
Yeah, that's wonderful. The beauty of the texts, whether it's Bhagavad Gita, which is what brought you and me together initially, or Yoga Sutras, or whatever the particular text is that one finds inspiration in, there is an equivalence in vocabulary that I think for those of us who are attempting to share what we've been given with others, that's our number one challenge, is to find a contemporary language with which to express millennial teachings. It's exciting and very, very challenging because terms evolve. Knowledge is not a fixed book sitting on a shelf. It's a living, breathing tradition that changes as we change and as the world around us changes. So that, for example, let's take it for instance, ahimsa. Well, there was a time when ahimsa was simply defined as non-violence, do no harm. Well, the world is so interconnected now that we need to evolve a certain more nuanced definition of ahimsa as non-aggressive participation, so that not only do we not do harm, but if we see harm being done, we are compelled by our practice to intervene and stop harm from being done. So that's a recent development. The world wasn't always a global village the way it is now, but that's a very exciting challenge and sometimes very difficult to find that contemporary equivalence in the words and the vocabulary.
Absolutely. I'd love for you to, I'm fond of chapter 14, and I keep once a year, I go back to chapter 14. There's a couple of reasons for that. But before I launch into how I apply chapter 14 each year to my life, I'd love for you to talk about the history of the text in terms of dates, the meta frame of what the story is. And one thing I've been curious about you that I've never had to ask you yet is whether this is a metaphor or actual form of God that actually came down. Did this story actually happen for you? Or do you so I grow quite a bit through symbols. I have here my Rudraksha malas and the Shiva lingam. I also have a a stone that has sat with me in many ceremonial practices with the shaman, and they anchor me back to the depth and center of the meaning of the mantra when the mind is still, and it helps to train my mind. So let's get into the meta frame of the text. And do you perceive it as an actual historical occurrence? And in some sense, these things don't matter, because I mean, I follow your brother's work as well, and I think there's the possibility we're in a simulation. There's multiverse. There's many lokas. So to say, is it real? Did it? You know, it's relative. So let's launch into the text, the metaframe, and how you perceive it.
So Bhagavad Gita 101.
101.
Let's start with the name. Bhagavad is a Sanskrit term that refers to Bhagava, that he who possesses all bhaga, or opulence. You know, the supreme being is the repository of all attractive, desirable qualities. Gita is a song or a call. So the call of the supreme being to all souls to rejoin in love and devotion. The text of Bhagavad Gita, which is only 700 verses, it's a short thing, depending on which particular school of Asian studies you adhere to. The general consensus is that it was spoken on a battlefield about 5,000 years ago. The battlefield called Kurukshetra is still there. You can get on a train in Delhi, and 4 hours later you can get off and visit Kurukshetra. It's a place of pilgrimage. It's an actual physical place. There's no question that the speaker, Sri Krishna, is a historic personality. There's very little debate about whether he was real or not. His identity is up for debate. You know, is he actually, as he claims in Gita, the supreme being, or was he a wise teacher? There are many different interpretations. Or as you suggested a moment ago, is the whole thing metaphorical? We'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
The setup, very briefly, is that the hero, the protagonist of this Gita, is a warrior named Arjuna. He and his 4 brothers, known collectively as the Pandavas, were kings of the throne. The throne at that time was called Hastinapur. Hasti means elephant, so the place where there are many elephants.
Mm-hmm.
Today it's New Delhi. Their throne had been illegally, criminally usurped from them by cousins of their family, known as the Kauravas. The Kauravas, in today's language, would be called terrorists. They were homicidal. They stopped at nothing to get what they wanted, and they needed to be brought down. They were hurting people. They were causing chaos in the society. Arjuna was a soft-hearted person, even though he was a warrior. And when the battle was about to begin, he looked across the field of Kurukshetra and realized that he was having to kill family members, leaders of the society. His own grandfather, Bhishma, was on the other side for political reasons. His military guru, Dronacharya, was there with the Kauravas. And so Arjuna had you might say, a crisis. He went into a kind of catatonic state where he describes at the end of the first chapter of the Gita, says, I don't remember my name. I'm feeling dizzy. I'm sweating. My palms are so clammy. I can't even hold my bows and arrows. I can't stand up anymore. He was really in a crisis. And at that moment, he did something very smart, because he was a brilliant scholar as well as warrior. He turns to Krishna, who was playing the part of his charioteer, and says, Shishyasteham sadhuman tvam prapannam. He says, now, even though we're friends, we grew up together, I want to put our friendship aside. I'd like to be your shishya. You please be my guru, be my teacher now. I'm in trouble and I need your help. And over the course of the next, let's say, 2 hours, Krishna and Arjuna have a dialogue in which Krishna imparts to Arjuna the basic wisdom that we were discussing a few minutes ago, essentially rallies Arjuna's self-confidence and realizes that this is a righteous battle, that while it may be fighting and harming people through warfare, it's a war that has to take place. And he does. The end of the Gita is that Arjuna picks up his weapons and goes to battle, and he and his brothers win the war and regain their lost kingdom. So, as you intimated a few minutes ago, people appropriate the Gita for different purposes. Gandhi and Bal Tilak saw the Gita as a political statement to rally the Indian populace to shake off the change of British colonial rule. There are others who interpret the Bhagavad Gita as an ecological statement, because Krishna speaks about the need to respect nature and how to live a holy life in the world. You can approach the Gita from many different perspectives. The opinion of the speaker, Krishna, is that the Gita is spoken in order to bring one to the point of prapatti, self-surrender in service to God. So it is a journey not only through the call to action on a battlefield, and each of us, of course, is on our own particular personal battlefield in life, but to become an agent of change in the world by reviving within ourselves knowledge of our own divinity, and then going out into the world, as Arjuna did in his way as a warrior, to effect positive change.
The idea, Joshua, of the spiritual warrior, when taken in the context of eternal pillars, there's a reason. Can we talk about why a teaching from 5,000 years ago is still so relevant, even though we can fly into outer space and have a device such as this to connect through time and space, to be in these coordinates and do magnificent work in our homes? This is going to reach people in an enlightening and hopefully positive way, but we are continuing to adapt our work to where you're not traveling to yoga studios or colleges to lecture right now, and I am teaching from my living room on a farm. But how does the Eternal Dharma help one who is sort of a spiritual warrior? And given that this is set on a battlefield, what is the real metaphor of the battle?
Well, first of all, a slight corrective. They were flying through space 5,000 years ago as well.
Vimanas.
They weren't using motor engines and rockets. But putting that aside, the world has changed socially, financially, economically, politically. Human nature hasn't changed that much.
Right.
We're still all embodied beings in this awkward place. What we call the human condition is being an eternal soul stuck in a temporary body, and that coming to grips with that is the challenge, and that hasn't really changed much. I mean, circumstances, people weren't traveling around the globe. There's been the evolution in communications and technology and so on, and so things were a little more local back then. The basic opportunity, the call, the Gita, is the same today as it was then, namely to recognize that we're not in our normal environment. We're in a temporary place. It's real, but it's a temporary reality. Look, I'm sorry, I don't mean to harp on this, but when I lost my mom, I don't think I could have had a more visceral encounter with the provisional nature of embodied life. I always thought she would always be there. And then she wasn't anymore. And it really hit me So intellectually, we may say, yes, we're eternal beings, we're not the body. That's very different from realizing that knowledge. This is such a radical idea that we are something more than bodies and minds. That's a game changer right there. That is a world changer right there. To really understand what that means, that you are a spark of divinity, that you have an essence to yourself that is immortal. I mean, imagine getting up in the morning. Okay, I call this the Latte Syndrome. Most of us get up in the morning, we rub the sleep out of our eyes, our feet hit the floor, we grab our latte, and we're off and running. And basically, we are today a repeat of whatever we were yesterday. Nothing's changed. Imagine getting up in the morning with this understanding. I am complete. I am eternal. I am beautiful. Nothing can harm me. I am here deputed to do good in the world. I am a part of this extraordinary, exciting adventure that we call the universe. And I have a family connection to all life. Why should I love you? I shouldn't love you just because that's some nice sentiment. It's a Hallmark card. I'll love you forever. I love you because, like me, you're a soul inside that body. And I know what you're going through. I go through it myself. So I love you because you're my brother. We're family.
Mm-hmm.
And your happiness is my happiness. And your distress is my distress. So to embrace that, look, I hear what you're saying about having to make the adjustments. I think one of the mistakes that people who are just new to the yogic process make is thinking that yoga is a refuge from the pains of the world, that yoga will attenuate all of my anxieties and things are going to be wonderful now. Yes, of course. If you practice yoga and you're breathing well and you're living a clean life, will you feel better? Sure, but that's only the bare surface of what yoga can do. The real reward of yoga is not that it's going to somehow magically erase all of the challenges in your life. It will equip you with tools for addressing those challenges more efficiently, more effectively. And in that sense, if people really knew what yoga was doing, they might run the other way.
Absolutely. I always say that.
So, and I think that's what our obligation, if I may, as teachers, people who aspire to be good servants of our students, is to make sure they understand that this isn't a refuge here. This is a place for learning how to go back into the world and see, if you will, God in the details of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those details are painful. But in that experience, there's also a lot to be understood. There's a lot of ground to be gained. So don't run away from it. Go deeper inside it.
Mm-hmm. Joshua, thank you for sharing about your love for your mother and how much she inspired you and how that affected you. Thank you for that. It means a lot. I too have used the teachings for understanding, but felt my humanity deeply and honored the reality of realizing the teaching that we are here temporarily. It's very profound. I want to hone in on the real battle being a space in between the ears, and for you to expound perhaps on the metaphor of the chariot, the charioteer, the five senses, and don't you think the battle is in directing the mind so that we can, for example, find peace together?
Wow, what an amazing question that is. You packed a lot in there. let's
Back to the spiritual warrior, though. It's I had, to be honest with you, I had some beef with this setting. It bothered me as a kid. My grandfather used to read the Gita to me, and I enjoyed it, but I always ran out of the house to play sports and be more American and be cool. And then when I started studying with you, I began to embrace it for what it was and extract the knowledge from it. But I was very disturbed that it was set on a war battlefield, and I didn't understand that metaphor.
Hmm. It's one of the challenges that many people face when they first come to study the Bhagavad Gita. Is they have how can a book of spirituality conclude with someone picking up weapons and fighting and killing? You know, how do you explain that one? The Gita is 18 chapters in what is known as the Bhishma Parva section of a much larger work called the Mahabharata. Mahabharata is like the Iliad and the Odyssey of the East. And if you read the larger story, you understand that war was not the first but last alternative for Arjuna and his brothers. They had tried everything else. They had tried negotiating with the Kauravas. They had tried sanctioning them. They had tried reasoning with them. They had tried bargaining. They had sent Krishna as their messenger, as a kind of mediator, to try to arrive at some kind of mutually agreeable middle ground. At one point, they even said, look, keep the kingdom. Keep it. We just need one village each because we're, administrators. We have to have something. And the Kauravas were so envious that they refused. They said, we will not give you enough land in which to drive the head of a pin. And at that point, war was inevitable. So it was the last course of action, not the first. So that's the first thing to understand about it. The second thing to understand, of course, is that unless you're serving in the military, most of us won't have to make that kind of an extreme decision as Arjuna did to raise arms and fight. That was his duty as an armed services officer, if you will. And he was serving as head of an army. That was his dharma. That may not be ours, but for him, that is what he had to do. We usually, our challenges are not quite that violent or that physical. So in terms of the mind, well, of course, that was Krishna's message to Arjuna as well. He said, look, you're giving me all kinds of excuses for not doing what you have to do. Control your mind. Your mind is running away with you here. And you're right, there's that image that's given in the Upanishads of the senses being like 5 horses. And the reins that control those horse-like senses are the mind. What's holding those reins? That's the intelligence. And the passenger on that chariot of the body, that's the soul. That's the core self. So ideally, the senses will operate under the control of a mind disciplined by intelligence. Now, intelligence, you might substitute the word education. If someone is properly educated, if they've received the blessing of effective spiritual instruction, then they'll understand where the mind should be directing the senses toward righteous action, toward non-harmful action, toward actions that are for the good of others as well as oneself. So how do you do that? How do you control the mind? Well, the first question is, why is the mind out of control? So that's a very interesting point. Now, the function of the mind is to very, very quickly accept or reject a situation so that the self is protected. If I have a car coming at me, you don't want the intelligence to be directing the actions. Well, I wonder why that car is so out of control. Is the driver having a bad day? And what is the trajectory of that car? Will it miss me by a little bit? Or, you want to get out of the way. That's the mind. The mind says, no, just move. In order to do that, in order to respond very quickly to stimuli, the mind has to shut down about 700 other functions. Deeper consideration, altruistic considerations. So there are all these other functions that need to be set aside so that the protection of the self can happen quickly. Well, that's a good thing. I mean, self-preservation is a good instinct. But if you want to move to a higher level of consciousness, you may need to override that sense of material self-preservation for the longer term benefit of spiritual self-preservation. That's where the meditation comes in. That's where the yoga comes in. That's where the education and the study of texts comes in. That's where the Sangha comes in. That's where the discussions come in. That's where the proper diet comes in. And it's amazing how what we eat so dramatically affects how we can think. It's amazing how those two things are connected, how our emotions are biochemically grounded. So watch what you put in your mouth. It's really, really critically important.
Yeah, I'm listening to you, and it goes back to, we have a mind, but we have to sometimes step beyond or outside of our mind, understand that space, and come back and direct our mind and understand that it's a tool and it's a vehicle for experience, but it gets wrangly. I sometimes hone in on a teaching of Master Iyengar. I'm always connecting the body-oriented hatha practices to the philosophy. So Master Iyengar taught us that the breath is also the king of the mind. So in a way, the breath and pranayam can be like those reins, can be setting it in a groove. I think setting the mind in a positive direction is more realistic than stopping the mind, even though stopping the mind is a goal. Yogash chitta vritti nirodhas, seizing thought. But that's a very scary idea, to seize thought. I want to jump to, and tell me if I'm correct in using the gunas. I enjoy studying chapter 14 for a couple of reasons. One of which is I'm in a situation where I constantly have to read energy. Back in the day when I taught physical classes before the pandemic started, I may have a game plan, for example, for a 6 p.m. class, and I walk in and there's 75 people waiting, and the energy, the script I've put together, the sequence of exercises to arrive at sattva is not going to work. I can feel it because I can read the energy in the air. I can read the way people are entering the room, and I make adjustments and for example, if I have my partner comes up to the country on the weekend and I'm going to receive her after a 2.5-hour drive, I use the gunas to calibrate my temperament and her temperament and how they're creating an interference pattern. And for example, in my day, if I have too much coffee, I might get rajasic and hyperactive, and my nature is passionate. So I'm a guy who puts boundaries on his sensual pleasure. I put safeguards around it so I don't get carried away by my senses. So the gunas, the three qualities of the world, sattva, rajas, and tamas, are like a gauging mechanism for me for reading energy. And also another aspect of it is how that chapter ends blows my mind in terms of we are training for a good death. It implies that if one dies in a state of anxiety and fear, that this is a negative implication for future births. And that stops me in my tracks and helps me to prioritize. I feel like a big part of applied spiritual practice is coming to one's priorities, knowing, for example, for this conversation, of course I would meditate. I chanted a sequence of mantras. I really wanted to get in the groove to connect with you, but to come back to what is a priority, is the meta frame of my life, is what I'm going for, in line with the eternal Dharma, and to think that one day, if I'm fortunate enough, I will be laying down and it won't be in an accident, and I'm going to leave my body gracefully. This is a fantasy. I could be riddled with anxiety. But just the way chapter 14 ends and implies that poise one has when one departs the material realm, and to know that one has done good work for humankind rather than selfish sensual pleasure. That chapter inspires me on so many levels, which is why I return to it. It's the kind of text that I don't read every year beginning to end, beginning to end. It's like a bullseye. Each time I go through a teaching, I get closer to the center. Whereas 10 years ago, I was on the periphery, and I see myself as a lifelong scholar of the text. I won't be able to expound on it from beginning to end tomorrow, but to keep digging, and to maybe I'll become enamored with a new chapter this year or next year. But I really love that idea of attaining a healthy mind that is fit to die. And I know you've just gone through that. Does my passion for that chapter make sense?
Oh, of course. My goodness. Absolutely. Look, if nothing else this year, there are a lot of people who have gone through the loss of a loved one. I know I've lost people very close to me to COVID, and if we learn anything from just living in Kali Yuga, it's that we never know. Any day may be our last day. We don't know that. So, and on the one hand, we're compelled to live each day to the fullest, to appreciate what life brings us, and in that appreciation to be prepared to go at any time. The beauty of yoga is that it is both tools for joyful living, and it's also tools for joyful dying. It can allow you to transition out of the physical and mental states with the least amount of interference. To achieve a position of jivan mukta, to be liberated even within this body, means, as you were describing a moment ago, to be able to bring certain energies into a manageable framework. Sometimes I think people misinterpret that verse that you quoted from Yoga Sutra, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, as meaning to renounce the agitations of the mind. Nirodha might be more effectively defined as management, to properly manage the vacillations of the mind. And that's where our yoga practice brings us, is to a place where we're neither elated in success and victory, or depressed in failure and darkness. We achieve a certain dispassionate, steady state. Samatvam yoga uchyate, says the Gita, to arrive at a place where the joy that we take from life is a joy that's within and is not dependent on some material circumstance, because you never know. There's that great story. I love telling this story from the Bengali tradition of two farmers, neighbors. One is a very pious but very poor man, and his neighbor is wealthy but very envious, kind of nasty fellow. And the envious guy is looking out his window, and he sees that the poor farmer's one horse has broken out of the stable and escaped to the hills. It goes over to the poor farmer and says, guess it's bad luck for you, huh? You lost your horse. And the pious farmer says, well, bad luck, good luck, who knows? And the next day, his horse comes back with a mare, having partnered with another horse in the hills. And the nasty farmer said, well, I guess it was good luck after all. You got two horses now. And the poor farmer says, well, good luck, bad luck, who knows? The next day, the poor farmer's son breaks his leg trying to tame the wild mare. And the nasty farmer comes up and says, "How, bad luck. See, your son broke his leg." And the poor, nice farmer says, well, bad luck, good luck, who knows? The next day, the country goes to war. And all of the young men are sent off to be killed, except the poor farmer's son, because he's broken his leg. Do you get the idea? It goes on and on and on. And we never know. Is what we're looking at materially really good? Have we really come across some fantastic, we've won the lottery? You know how many people who have won the lottery have ended up killing themselves, committing suicide? They don't know how to manage it. They don't know what to do with it. Something that may materially seem very favorable could be the introduction to the worst chapter of your life. On the other hand, something that may seem very tragic could be preparation for the most glorious, rewarding time you've ever known. So we can't judge these things. We can't judge them by their surface appearance. Our job is to take the circumstances around us, to be grateful for this wonderful life that we have, this beautiful life that allows us to thrill to the realization that we're surrounded by God at every moment, and be grateful. Gratitude is a wonderful way to confront setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
To see the glass as half full, if you will.
That brings me to sadhana, the Sanskrit word for practice. And you guys definitely focus on health and nutrition, as I do as well.
Who's you guys?
The bhaktis,
right.
the Krishna devotees.
I wasn't sure we were going there for a minute.
Yeah. I wanted to hone in on the nature of sadhana and how it's to be done, because its form is different. At Eddie Stern's Shala, for example, sadhana involved attentiveness to one's breath through a whole full body oriented exercise system. But the object of concentration is the breath. And on your path, there's obviously more direct study of the text and more chanting, and it is an equal form of mental discipline that suits the constitution of the practitioner and the Indic way of honoring the different constitution and giving a form of self-discipline, mental direction, that the nature of sadhana can vary. But I want to talk to you about the consistency in terms of the regularity, the uninterrupted nature, and the quality of devotion one must bring in order to traverse the samskaras, the weight of the past. We have brought, you and I believe, that all of our woes are not from this life alone, that when one goes very deeply, we have carried some things that need working out. Sometimes we're born with a fear that cannot be traced back in our childhood, for example. So these are karmas that need working out. How does one perform sadhana with respect to the recommendations of the text in order to attain peace and self-knowledge?
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Very nice. Well, Jai, a moment ago, you described, I think quite accurately, that, the breathing leads the yoga. As long as you're breathing, the Bhakti tradition says you might as well be chanting a mantra. So whether you're chanting to yourself or you're chanting out loud, I have beads, I chant, where my beads are back there. I chant about an hour and a half, the Krishna mantra every day, which for me is like vitamins. I so look forward to chanting now. It's not, people would, when I was younger, people would always ask me, how can you be singing the same song over and over again? They have no idea the joy in inviting God into your life through the recitation of his names. It's such an intimate, warm, joyful thing. These days, because I've been doing it for a half a century, it can also be a little emotional, quite, just between you and me. It's such a wonderful thing. So this sadhana, or the daily practices. The direct answer to your question is take it at your own pace. As we were discussing before, if you rush into this, the knowledge is so powerful, it can become overwhelming. How many people, Jai, have you and I known who started on the yoga path, and then you turn around one day and where did they go? They just disappeared. I don't think it's because they lost interest or they were bored. I think it's quite the opposite. I think things were happening that they didn't understand and they got scared because they went into it so quickly that, when the power of the yoga begins to show itself, you kind of go, whoa, what's going on here? You go into heart asanas, right? Heart poses. You can start crying spontaneously. Well, why is that? What's happening? Something's being touched in there. And for some people, it can be absolutely, devastating. So slow down, just, take it a step at a time. My teacher, Prabhupada, used to say, when you're eating, you don't need someone else to tell you when you're full. Just take it, you're feeling satisfied, fine, move forward little by little. You don't have to start by chanting an hour and a half a day the way I do. Start with 5 minutes, do something. Whatever you can do regularly, that's the guideline. Whatever you can do comfortably every day without fail. And so if it's only 5 minutes, fine, but do that much steadily every day. And then little by little, you can be increasing comfortably. And so that, common sense is a good guideline when it comes to determining what is the sadhana that's right for you. I would also caution people to not try to do things on their own, especially now. We're in a lockdown here, and it's really tough. People are suffering from loneliness on top of everything else. Find a friend. Find someone you can share this journey with. And the Bhakti texts describe that there are generally, without wanting to profile people, there are generally 3 levels that you can look at and identify someone. The first level is called Kanishta. Kanishta is someone who is a neophyte. And generally they think, well, my way is the right way. Everyone else has got the wrong idea. So do it my way. And that to a Kanishta, you are respectful, but don't make close friendships with Kanishtas. Make friendships with Madhyam. Madhyam means someone who's in the middle level where they're striving sincerely. They're kind of on the level where you are, still learning, still moving forward, but they've achieved a certain degree of proficiency in their practice. That's a good person to make a friendship with. And then you have the Uttama. Uttama means more advanced, the evolved yogis. From such people, take instruction, offer some service, ask questions, and you won't generally want to be, that with the Uttamas, you're not going to go hang out after work and knock back a couple of tall, cold ones. Those are people you take instruction from and you offer some service. So look for people on your level, people you're comfortable with, and make a friend so that you can share, the value of sadhana, and particularly the element within those daily practices that we call, fellowship would be the word in the church, right? Mm-hmm. Is that you can share your realizations, you can share the challenges that you're having. Hey, I came up against this hurdle. How do you handle that? You can swap ideas. So a friendship in spiritual life is a really good asset.
Absolutely. I feel like I've been that Jivamukti community. I was the kid brother to teachers like Rima and Dachen, and they helped to pull me up until I could find my independence. And having a community of like minds like that always, it's sort of like I remember I had a younger personality before there that was so different, of friends that were into nightlife. And not so good things happen in the dark in New York City at night when you're running around as when you're at the yoga center first thing in the morning. So I definitely appreciate the value of a good community and satsang. Joshua, do you have, I booked 90 minutes. I just want to be mindful of your time in case you have things that you, other calls.
Jai, I always enjoy my time with you. So if you had another question or two that you'd like to discuss.
I do. And I want to get to also what you're writing these days and talk about how one interested in the Gita can launch into your book as a starting point in terms of being relatable and a summary of the chapters. But before we get to that, I'd like to ask you, someone new to yoga will see the symbology of many gods and deities around, and this can be intimidating and off-putting, but can you explain a little bit the concept of Ishta Devata and how that, you know, that means cherished divinity, personal divinity, and I chant a different mantra primarily than you, but we relate to both, and they're inspiring different parts of ourselves. But that Shiva mantra brings me to a place of stillness, remembrance, deep memory, and prioritization that just anchors me to the inner reality, and how that can be used. Symbols can be applied to find the God within and to see the divine person all throughout the world around us and beyond us.
You remind me of the first time I heard my teacher Prabhupada say, once you understand that everything is personal, things start to make sense. I never forgot that. There's personhood in everything. The qualities of nature. The beauty of the yogic traditions is that they endow the forces of the universe with personality, with shape and form. And it's a wonderful way of getting inside something that otherwise might be quite bewildering and complex. So that when we speak of the Ishta Devata, or one's personal divinity, because each of us comes with our own particular background, not everyone is attracted to the same kind of a relationship. If, for example, someone comes from a background where perhaps one's father was very authoritative, well, then you'll perhaps be attracted to a strong personality. You know, you like that.
That's me and Eddie Stern. His name is Stern.
Okay,
he says it very directly and in very curt phrases, and you remember them.
Yeah.
Like my military dad, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, someone else who comes from, let's say, perhaps a softer, more right hemispherical, poetic background may prefer a more romantic divinity. You know, Krishna is the god of love, and the image of Radha and Krishna as the yin and yang of the universe, of this exchange of love, may not be for everybody, but for many people, that's a very, very appealing image. So depending on what one's particular disposition is, one will have an inclination to one kind of worship or a recognition of nature or another. I would caution, however, that there's a difference between that kind of a personal interpretation of the Vedic cosmology and an understanding of that cosmology from within the tradition itself. And I think that's important. Let me explain what I'm trying to say here. There's a metaphorical. We're talking about now a metaphorical way of understanding deities and devas and the forces of nature. For example, one of the great Bhakti teachers, Bhaktivedanta Thakur, who was teaching in the second half of the 1800s, in a book called Krishna Samhita, describes a pastime of Krishna where there was a demon, an asura, named Aghasura, who took the form of a giant serpent. And this giant serpent wanted to kill Krishna and kill all of his cowherd boyfriends. So he laid down on the road to Vrindavan, Krishna's village, and he stretched his jaws up and wide and pretended to be a mountain cave. And all the cowherd boys came by and said, "Oh, look, a big snake pretending to be a mountain cave. Let's go inside," because they knew Krishna is going to save us. So they all danced into the mouth of the Aghasura, and Aghasura choked them all, and they expired. And Krishna walked into the mouth of the Aghasura, and with his mystic powers brought all of the cowherd children back to life, and choked the life out of the Agha demon. And from that giant body, the cowherd children made a playground, and they made swings on the serpent's teeth, and they were sliding off of his tail. You know, the young children became the victorious heroes here, right? Bhaktivedanta says intellectuals reading a story like that in the Bhagavad Purana, it's found in the Puranas, will say this is all mythology. So their approach, the way they can have access to the Sanskrit wisdom, is on a metaphorical level. And that's very valid. We also have to allow room that there may be certain people who read literally, you know, that this is it. The words on the text, a fundamentalist teaching. If it's in the book, it's truth, it's real. That's another interpretation, that the Aghasura was a real demon. There's another level, which is called the Saragrahin. I think this is the one that we're aspiring to be here. The Saragrahin have their own conviction in their hearts. And for them, the reality of God doesn't depend on any kind of empiric historic evidence. They sense God. They know the presence of God. And whether someone is interpreting scriptures literally or metaphorically is irrelevant. The Saragrahan is able to appreciate other people's appreciations without having to have any kind of conversional agenda. So everyone can have access to truth, whether you see it metaphorically, whether you see it as literal history, whether you see it within the reality of your own heart as something that embraces all of those different perspectives. That's the beauty of absolute truth, is that it's valid for everyone, believer, non-believer, the Mayavadin, the Bhakta. It's absolute. It's the peak of the mountain. It's the same no whether you approach that peak from the eastern side or the western side. When you get to the top, we're all at the same top.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. That is fascinating that there are infinite paths to the top of that mountain, and they can be respected and honored, and we will use different tools to get there. I'm curious about, Joshua, what you're writing now and what you can say to a guy who is endeavoring to get his thoughts together.
Well, my academic background is in Holocaust history. And most of my books have been biographies of Holocaust survivors, or in one instance, the chief prosecutor of Nazi war crimes trials that took place south of Nuremberg. That poster on the back there, Unstoppable, is the book that I wrote that's coming out April 6th. It's about a fellow who came to America in 1947 after 2 years of forced labor and 2 more years in Auschwitz, suffering the worst kinds of beatings and starvation and dehumanization. Came here with nothing, elementary school education, no contacts, no money. By the time he passed away in 2003, he left an oil and banking empire with assets of more than $4 billion.
Oh, wow.
And that I didn't think I was ever going to write a book about the Holocaust again. I was done with the darkness. I just wanted the light. But in the life of this man, Siggy Wilzig, I discovered something. I discovered that it is possible to go through even the darkest of times. And if you are lucky, Siggy would say it was the hand of the Almighty that he survived and came out just relishing every moment of his life. He loved his life so much he would get up in a restaurant and start singing and dancing right in the middle of a restaurant. And he was a terrible jokester. He used to tell jokes all the time. So he was a life lover, having seen history's darkest hour, having lived through the most horrible things that you don't even want to talk about them. So that book took me 6 years to write. I've done more than 100 interviews for that book because I was so inspired by this man's love of life. And in a way, I think he embodied an important principle of the yogic path. He wasn't a yogi in the technical sense of that term, but he was someone who understood that there is always resources. There are always, sometimes, even if it's just a thread, that can, if you look and you trust that the universe is benign, it's beneficent, and that it is favoring life, you will find something to help you through even the most impossible of circumstances. There was one moment on a death march when Siggy was down to 88 pounds and he was sure he was going to die. And it was in the middle of a freezing snowstorm and his shoelaces broke off. And without shoes, you would get frostbite and die. So what did he have? He had nothing. He had a spoon with him and he sharpened the edge and he saw a tree and he went over and he cut some strips of bark off the edge of the tree and twisted the strips of bark together and made a shoelace and tied it around his shoe. And it held. Literally a thread made of bark saved his life.
Mm.
There's always a thread. There's always something. And I believe that faith means knowing that if you look, you'll find that thread. That there are forces at work in the universe that are rooting for you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just pull yourself out of your despair, if you get out of that stuck, like Arjuna, stuck in that point of despair, if you remember, a lot of yoga is about remembrance, It's recall of a state of being that we were once in, but have become estranged from. If you recall that original place, you will find that thread, and there won't be any circumstance so overwhelming that you won't be able to find a way out.
I love that. I love that the universe is rooting for us. And that sounds amazing. It's April 6th.
Yeah.
And we can order it from Amazon.
Yeah, it's out there now.
I'm due for a biography. I'm really excited about that. So I'll order that. I'll pre-order it. As we wrap up here, I would love for you to talk about, that was wonderful, by the way, just the story of resilience, because at this time we need a little resilience, and the work ahead in America calls for tremendous cooperation. And I want to segue as we wrap up to the role of faith and what to have faith in and how faith carries us through the good days and the bad days. It's easy to practice on a good day. It's harder to get to it on a day with inertia or heaviness, or if you come off of your routine for some reason. So let's talk about faith. And the Gita encourage us to have a sense of faith.
Well, the Sanskrit word for faith, shraddha, has as its root shrinu, which means to remember. So there's a lovely concordance in what we're discussing here. Ideally, faith is not blind faith. That's different. True faith is grounded in knowledge. In fact, if all that you have is faith and you don't study, then it's sentimental and you'll go away. That faith will break. It'll leave you at some point. These are two parallel tracks. In Sanskrit, it's called Pancharatrika Vidhi and Bhagavata Vidhi. There is the, if you will, the path of the faith of the practice. Practice is a kind of faith. I'm doing this yoga. I have faith that it's going to take me somewhere. You have to have some faith to do that, to continue with that practice. But what reinforces that is the study. Ground yourself in the knowledge of the background of yoga, the purpose of yoga, the functioning of yoga. And you'll find that those days when you get up and you go, oh God, do I really got to do this? You'll have a reason for doing it because your knowledge will say, yes, this is good. It's like a medication. You may not know the chemical composition of the medicine, but if you take it regularly as prescribed by a doctor, it will have the desired effect. So faith means I may not understand how this is working, but gosh, the more I do it, the more I'm beginning to experience how it's working, and that increases my faith. So faith coupled with that determination, constant effort. This is in Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna tells Krishna, I can't do it. You're describing yoga to me, and it's like I'd have controlling my mind. It's like controlling the wind. I can't do that. Krishna says, yes, you can, with faith and determination.
With faith and determination.
Yeah, the two things are needed.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Tell us where people can find you, your website, a list of your work, and then we'll sign off.
GitaWisdom.org. GitaWisdom.org. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for...
Thank you. And the book is unstoppable, and I can't wait to read it. And the other text, it's not a text, another intro is the Gita Wisdom. That book is, my copy's in Canada at my mother's house, where half of my library is. But that's a great introduction to studying the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita.
Thank you.
So Josh, thank you so much. I enjoyed this talk, man, full of life, and I learned a few new things as always. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jai. Thank you for inviting me to be your guest.
Awesome. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I really, really enjoyed that talk. The spiritual teachings are like a bullseye. Like if we're aiming at a bullseye, when we first encounter a teaching, it might be out here on the periphery, at the edge of the bullseye, at the very outer ring. So if we're throwing a dart and we want to hit the center, it might take a few years for that teaching to keep reaching closer and closer to the core. As the mark of the dart hits the center of the board is when the mind and the heart connect, when our intelligence starts to connect to our compassion. So Josh's work has been inspiring on my personal path, and I hope that you follow up with some of his teachings. He's a lecturer nationwide, and he'll be out on tour promoting his new book, Unstoppable. You can follow my work, my offerings, my teachings, my classes, and learn more about products that I have for educating and inspiring personal growth on my website, jaisugrim.com. You can also support the show by being a contributor and have these special benefits of community and personal community teachings by joining my Patreon at an accessible level for you. Go to patreon.com/Jai Sugrim. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic, fantastic, super duper, amazing, spectacular, ultra dope day.